Hello, welcome to another motorcycling video. In this video I'm going to talk about driving and motorcycle riding and whether it's a right or a privilege. There are some people who think that riding or driving a car is a right, that everybody should be able to do it, and essentially that people should be able to do it unfettered and unchecked and unimpeded by the government and by rules and regulations. I don't happen to believe that. I think that driving a car or riding a motorcycle is a privilege. It's a privilege you earn, and it's a privilege you keep by demonstrating certain competencies. You earn it by demonstrating those competencies. You keep it by demonstrating those competencies. You keep it by demonstrating a willingness and a capacity to abide by the rules and regulations that govern motor vehicles and drivers. There are lots and lots of regulations that govern motor vehicles, determining if they're roadworthy and safe, making sure they're insured, and so on. And there are lots of regulations that cover drivers. There are lots of regulations that cover the movement of vehicles on roads. If we were all sensible, intelligent people and we behaved sensibly and rationally and intelligently, we wouldn't need road rules and regulations, but the evidence is clear that we don't behave that way. Otherwise there wouldn't be as many accidents as there are every year. Otherwise there wouldn't be as many people fined every year as there are. So to get a motorcycle licence in Australia, you have to be a certain age, which I think at minimum is 16, and you first of all take what's called a stay upright course. That is a course that shows you the basics of how to handle a motorcycle and how to manoeuvre it. If you pass that course is either 2 half days or 1 full day. Now, as to whether that's adequate training for learning how to ride a motorcycle, I'm not in a position to comment. I'm not an expert, and I'm not in a position to offer an alternative or make a comment, but I'm sure there are people who think it could be better, and there'll be other people who think it's already too complicated. Compare that to the fact that when you want to get a car licence, you have to do 100 hours of logbook driving with a fully licensed driver, and that has to be on all sorts of roads under all sorts of conditions, so that you're experiencing the exact sort of conditions that you're going to get when you become a licensed driver. But so you take your stay upright course, you go and take the road rules test at the Services New South Wales or whatever it's called in your state, and if you pass that, you're given a learner's permit. Now, there are restrictions on what you can do as a learner. You can't take a pillion passenger, for example. You cannot ride a bike that's not learner approved motorcycle scheme, or LAMS, and essentially that means a motorcycle above 650 capacity or displacement, or one that has more than 150 kilowatts of power to weight ratio, where the assumed weight of the rider is 90 kilograms. That's because we say that for learners, big and powerful bikes, they're just too big and powerful, and you're not experienced enough, and you're not ready for one of those. You have to wait a little while. So you get your learner's permit, and you set off on the road and you go riding, and you ride wherever you want, whenever you want. In some states, I know in Queensland, for example, that you are required to have a licensed driver with you when you go riding. I'm not sure how that's policed, and I'm not sure how you'd get into it. What would happen if you said, well, I started out with my licensed driver, but I went through on the green light and turned left, and then he must have got caught at the red, and when I looked behind me he wasn't there, and I don't know where he is now, or she is. I can see the reason for that the person, the properly licensed rider, is behind you, can see the things that you were doing, and after the ride give you a debriefing and talk about places where you did well and maybe where you took a wrong line, or maybe where you went around a corner too quickly or something like that. But that's, as far as I know, that's the only state where that happens. So you get your learner's permit, you get your bike, you can't be over 650, it can't be a powerful bike. If you're into cruisers, for example, typically what a lot of people do is they buy themselves a Honda 400, or I think it's a 400 cruiser, and they ride that until they get a full license, and they sell it and get a bigger bike. So you go off riding, and I don't think you can get your L plate one day and say, well, tomorrow I'm going to go for my licence. you have to have it for a minimum period. I'm not sure how long that is, but when you're ready to go for your licence, you have to go to the same people that took you through the Stay Upright course, and they give you a test to see if you are ready to have a licence. There are certain skills and strategies and competencies that you must demonstrate, and if you demonstrate those, if you fail any one of them, you fail the course. But if you demonstrate all of those, you get a certificate that says you passed that part of the course. Then you go back to the licensing authority, as I said, Services in New South Wales, and you present that certificate, and they'll give you a licence. So you get what's called a provisional licence. We have a graduated system of licences in New South Wales. You have a Red P, which I think you might keep for 2 years, or it may be 1 year. You are limited again in the bikes that you can ride. You're also limited in the speed that you can ride at, which I think is 90 kilometres an hour. And if you keep that Red P for the required period and have no infringements, you then go on to a Green P, a Green Provisional Licence, which you again keep for either 1 or 2 years. So the provisional licences last for 3 years. And if at the end of that 3-year period you again had no infractions and no infringements and so forth, you will then move on to a full licence or a black licence, which you can renew every year. And I think after you've had a few years of doing that, if you've been proven to be a good driver, they give you the option of renewing it every 5 years rather than every year. Now, that's the process for getting the licence. The process for keeping the licence is a little bit more complicated because you have to obey the road rules. You have to obey the laws of the road. In Australia, we have a demerit system on licences, and how that works simply is that everybody starts with a clean slate. But if you committed a traffic offence such as speeding or drink driving or driving under the influence of drugs, or in the case of a motorcycle not wearing a helmet or something like that, you will be stopped by the police. You will be issued with an on-the-spot infringement notice or a fine. In some cases you may be required to go to court. If you're caught drink driving, for example, or under the influence of drugs, you will be required to go to court. But in other instances you'll just get an infringement notice or a fine on the spot. And you will attract a certain number of demerit points depending on the offence. When you reach 12 demerit points, your licence will be suspended for a period of time. It might be 3 months or 6 months, depending on your driving record. If it's a first offence, it might be 3 months. If it's a second offence, it might be 6 months or longer. If you have been caught drink driving, you will go to court, as I said. You will get a fine, and you will have your licence suspended automatically for a period, depending on the blood alcohol reading that you had. If you found testing positive to a banned substance, such as any narcotic, any illegal substance, it isn't the level of impairment that you have to worry about. It's the fact that you had an illegal substance in your system, and you will have your licence suspended and you will be fined. So, first of all, you have to obey the road rules. Secondly, you have to make sure that you don't accumulate more than 12 demerit points in a given period, which I think is 12 months. In some states, when you get to 11 points, the licensing authority will write to you and say, you've only got 1 point left. We're going to offer you a deal. The deal is that if you agree you can to be a good driver for the next 12 months, at the end of that 12 months, if you have no infringements, all your demerits will be wiped and you'll have a clean slate. If, however, in that period you incur another infringement, your licence will automatically be suspended, but not for the period you might normally have got it for, but for double the period. So let's supposing you were caught speeding 10 k's over the speed limit, and the suspension was 3 months. If you're on the golden point rule, your suspension now becomes 6 months. In some states, notably Victoria, if you refuse to take a roadside breath test or submit to a roadside drug test, regardless of the result, if you said, the police officer said, I wish to administer a roadside drug test or a roadside breath test, and you said, no, I'm not going to take it, doesn't matter what the result might have been, the fact that you refuse to take the test is now an offence, and your licence will be suspended for a period of 2 years automatically. The magistrate, when you go to court, will have no discretion. The law says it must be suspended for 2 years, and it will be suspended for 2 years. Now, if this is your second offence within a period, I think, of 10 years, your next suspension will be 4 years. So it pays to take the roadside test, submit to the result, go to court, plead guilty, and you might find that your suspension is less than the automatic 2 or 4 years that you would have incurred otherwise, but you will be required, as well as that, to attend a driver education program, and you will be required, as well as that, to have an interlock system on your car, which is a system where you can't start your car if you have any alcohol in your system. So, keeping your licence is a privilege. You try not to earn demerit points so that your licence will be suspended. You do that by demonstrating a knowledge of and a willingness and a capacity to abide by the road rules. If you go to court and argue with the magistrate that you were unaware that such and such was the law, you will get nowhere, because ignorance of the law is never a defence. You're expected to know what the law is, and if you don't know it, you cannot plead that I did not, or you can plead it, but the magistrate will say that's not a defence. I don't accept your defence, and I apply the appropriate penalty. Whenever we have traffic incidents where a number of teenagers are in a car and there's an accident and there are fatalities, there are calls for tougher penalties, more powers for the police, mandatory penalties and mandatory sentencing and so on. And when these things happen, they make life difficult for everybody else, because you might be a good driver, I might be a good driver, we don't know about the person in that other car that's in the lane beside us or coming towards us from the opposite direction. But if you, even with your good driving record, sometimes commit one of these offences that was now a mandatory penalty for, you will be subject to that mandatory penalty, and you will lose your licence for the requisite period, for the prescribed period, no matter the fact that up until that point you've had a good driving record. In previous times, or in earlier times, you might have been able to plead a hardship and say to the magistrate, well, I need my licence to drive, and you may well have got what was called a conditional licence to be able to drive you to and from work, for example. Unfortunately, people abuse that system, and the police would pull people over and find them in their car on their provisional licence to go to work on a Saturday afternoon with 4 or 5 kids in the car going off to the football and saying, well, we know you're not going to work now, so you're abusing the provisional licence or the conditional licence for you to go to work. And so there are no such things now. It's a bit like being a little bit pregnant. You can't be a little bit pregnant. You either are or you aren't. So if you are suspended from driving, then you are suspended from driving in all circumstances, not just recreationally, but in every other way as well. And yes, of course, that is an inconvenience, and in some cases it means that people lose their jobs. If you're a truck driver and you have your licence suspended, for example, you lose your job. If you live in a rural area where there is no public transport, you can't get on the train or the tram or whatever it is and go to work, and you say to your boss, I've lost my licence and I can't get to work, it's unlikely that he's going to say, well, work from home for the next 3 months. You might have to do one of two things. A, pay a driver to drive you to work every day, or B, lose your job and look for another one that doesn't involve public transport or doesn't involve you needing a car to get to work. That's unfortunate and inconvenient, yes, but it's part of the privilege of driving. Now you can argue and say, well, it's so easy to come under the notice of the police or be fined or end up with your licence suspended because you're just driving along and suddenly you get pulled over by the police for whatever offence it is. There is, as I said, a bunch of regulations that regulate your vehicle and say it must be roadworthy, and it's incumbent upon you to make sure that your vehicle is roadworthy, so that every now and again you're supposed to check the tyres and check the lights and all those basic functions and make sure they all work. If you don't, a police officer pulls you over and says your tail lights aren't working, or your brake lights aren't working, or your headlights, you've got a blown headlight or something like that, then that is a responsibility that you should have known about. You're supposed to check these things on a regular basis. You are responsible for your driving habits. In Australia, we have pretty well, I think, 4 basic speed limits, maybe 5. On the open road in most states and territories, the maximum speed limit is 110 kilometres an hour. In the Northern Territory, I think it's 135, but in every other state or territory, the maximum speed limit is 110 kilometres an hour. That's always shown on a white sign with a black circle and red figures inside it, and those figures refer to kilometres. In a built-up area, the speed limit is 50 kilometres per hour. A built-up area is an area where there's houses and schools and shops, a suburban area or an urban area. Outside of urban areas, in rural areas, sometimes the speed limit is 80 kilometres an hour, because there may be some houses, but not a whole. There's not a big suburb. There might be just a few houses, and they've asked you to slow down to 80 kilometres an hour because people could be coming in and out of driveways and so on. There is a 40 kilometre per hour speed limit around schools, but the school zone speed limits operate differently in each state. In New South Wales, they operate, I think, between 9 and 10:30. It might be 8:30 and 10 o'clock of a morning. It's clearly stated on the signs at the schools, but they operate in the morning hours of the school and in the afternoon hours. I think it's similar in most other states, but in the ACT, for example, the school zones operate all day. So when you're going through a school zone in the ACT, irrespective of the time, or regardless of the time, you are expected to slow down to 40 kilometres an hour. So 110 on the open road. Some freeways and motorways have a speed limit of 100 kilometres an hour. I'm not really sure why that is, but they just do. In rural areas, the speed limit may drop down to 80 kilometres an hour. In built-up areas, 50 kilometres an hour. In school zones, 40 kilometres an hour. Some other areas where there's high pedestrian traffic, the speed limit may drop down to 30 or even lower, but you're expected to know that, and you're responsible to for driving your car at or below that speed limit. Now, if you're out on the open road and your car has cruise control, set it at 105. You might get there 5 minutes later than you would if you set it at 110, and the cars in the right lane, if there is a right and left lane, will go past you, but you'll still get there, and you won't incur the wrath of the police officers. Neither will you incur the notice of those point-to-point cameras that operate, I think, in most states these days. If you're in an area where, because of the stop-start nature of the traffic, you can't use your cruise control, you're in an urban area, you know that it's 50 kilometres an hour, drive a little below the 50 kilometre an hour speed limit if possible. If you're coming into a rural area and you're not sure what the speed limit is, then slow down at least to be under the 110, maybe even under the 100 kilometre an hour. And if in doubt, perhaps even slow down to the 80 kilometre per hour limit, and the person who's behind you and getting impatient, let them pass you and get ahead of you, and they'll get the fine and you won't. So your responsibility as a licensed driver is to say, I've got to make sure my vehicle is roadworthy, I've got to make sure that I'm licensed to drive my vehicle. If you drive unlicensed, that is an offence, and you certainly will face fines and penalties, which may involve even longer suspension than the one you already have, and it may in some cases result in some custodial time. I'm not giving you legal advice because I'm not qualified to do that, but I can imagine if you have been caught driving while unlicensed several times, the magistrate's going to lose patience with you, and at some stage they may say to you, well, you're going to have to have a custodial sentence here to learn your lesson. So your vehicle is roadworthy. You are licensed to ride or drive the vehicle that you are riding or driving. It's not a vehicle that you are prohibited from riding or driving, so it's a motorcycle and you're a provisional licence holder. You're expected to know what the list of bikes that you can't ride is. If you are a provisional car licence holder, there is a long list of powerful, supercharged, turbocharged, high-performance vehicles that you simply are not allowed to drive. And you're expected to know that. You can look it up on the state transport authority or the licensing authorities in your state. You can look it up on their website and they'll give you a list. And if you're uncertain about the vehicle you're about to get in and start driving, look it up and see if it is on that prohibited list, because if it is and you drive it and you're on a provisional licence, you will incur a fine, you will attract demerit points, and you may well have your licence suspended. Now in New South Wales, on top of all of that, we have what are called double demerit periods. That means that when a double demerit period is declared, which is usually every long weekend and every school holiday period at the start of the school holidays and at the end of the school holidays, when of course there's much more traffic on the road, the government invokes the double demerit thing. And that means that whatever offence you might have done or might be fined for, the demerit points are now doubled. So let's say, just for argument's sake and for purposes of illustrating it, if you attract 2 demerit points for driving 10 or more kilometres between 10 and 15 kilometres over the speed limit, in a double demerit point period, that would be 4 demerit points. Let's imagine there were 2 people in your car not wearing seatbelts. Not wearing a seatbelt, I think, is a 2 or 3 demerit points. So if it's 3 demerit points and there are 2 people in your car not wearing seatbelts, even if you're wearing one, you're the driver, you're responsible, that could be 6 demerit points. You could have done your 12 demerit points in one hit because somebody didn't wear their seatbelt. So my point here is driving is a privilege, not a right. You keep the privilege you earn the privilege by showing competency to drive the vehicle in the first place. You keep it by showing the competencies, by showing a willingness and a capacity to abide by the rules and make sure that you do the right thing, and hopefully everybody else is on the road will do the right thing and we'll all get where we're going safely and get home again afterwards. Thanks for watching. If you have an opinion, leave it at the end and I'll leave it at the appropriate place and I will comment when I become aware of it. Enjoy your ride and I'll catch you next time.